Hi, this is Kevin Noren, U.S. Chess Federation Life Master, and I'm here to show you another game. This one was played by somebody named Arnold, who had the white pieces, and Hanauer had the black pieces. It was played in Philadelphia in 1936. So it starts out like d4, knight f6, c4, very standard move, and now black plays e5. Now this is called the Budapest Gambit, or the Budapest Defense. Looks like he's giving up a pawn for nothing, but let's see what happens. Now, if white takes that, that's not what was played in this game. The knight comes to g4, threatening to get the pawn back. And after white's most natural move, knight f3, then comes bishop c5, hitting f2, and the only decent move is to play e3. Then black brings the other knight out to c6, threatening to get the pawn back. The only way white can defend it is to play queen d5. Then black puts one more piece on it, and with queen e7, and black is going to get his pawn back with a decent game. Now, gambits are pretty dangerous, and sometimes people like to decline them, not accept the gambit, and that's what white did in this case. So after e5, he advanced with d5. Now that's a sort of a normal looking kind of move. It gains space, but the problem is in a lot of queen pawn openings you see this pawn formation, but here it just allows black to develop his bishop to a nice square. I already like black's game better, and he can easily develop his pieces, and now white does something a little bit crazy, and you have to watch out for this kind of move because this kind of trap occurs in numerous different openings. But white played bishop to g5. Now, this gets the kind of thing gets played a lot. I even see decent players fall into this. Black actually ignored the pin and plays knight to e5. And there's a threat here. White overlooked it. He should play here, and then he's got a terrible game after bishop takes. And then this queen checks. The only move is to play here, and then the knight can take that because his pawn is pinned. But apparently white is the sort of person that doesn't look both ways before crossing the street, and he took the queen, and black simply played bishop takes f2, checkmate. Well, that's it for our game. Well, wait a minute, I thought we were doing this for TikTok. Well, this is for YouTube. Well, that gives us time for another game. Well, we're back, and since we haven't time for another game, let's look at this game. It's played by Nikolai Krogius, or Krogius, of the Soviet Union. He was actually a psychologist, and he was on the Boris Spassky's team for the famous match of the century in 1972 against Bobby Fischer. But here we see a game where he's playing somebody named Oyanen, and it was played in Helsinki, 1944. So let's have a look. Starts with e4, c5, the Sicilian. No surprise there. It's the most common defense according to the databases. And white played d4. Now, the most frequent thing that white does is play knight f3 and then d4. So this might just amount to a transposition. Actually, for some reason, Morphy likes this order of moves. But anyway, black takes. Yeah, that's the only decent move, really. And now white comes out with knight f3 to regain the pawn, and then we'll just transpose into regular lines of the Sicilian. But black sees a little opportunity here. He sees that he can defend that pawn with e5. Because if white takes this pawn, then out comes queen to a5 check, winning the knight. This kind of check is often overlooked by people, I guess because of that sideways motion is a little unusual. Of course, Krogius, who is a grandmaster, sees something like that, and he just makes a gambit out of it and plays c3. Now he's threatening to get his pawn back with a very good game. And so black takes because he wants to keep an extra pawn, and white takes back. Now white is a pawn down here, but I've talked about gambits before. They're extremely dangerous, and this one is extra dangerous because, first of all, white's already got two knights out. He's ready to get more pieces out all of black's pieces are sitting down. White has also opened up lines for both of his bishops. This is looking pretty dicey for black already. And a lot of times these short games, a lot of them result because one side just falls way too far behind in development, and the other side just has all these pieces coming at the defender. So right now, white not only has a lead in development, he happens to be threatening to take on e5, and black has, well, there's a number of ways to defend it. The most obvious ones are knight c6 and d6. Probably knight c6 is better. I think that white has great compensation for the pawn no matter what. But in our game, d6 was played, and then white plays, I think, a fairly obvious move, bishop to c4. Great diagonal, controlling this square and hitting at f7. Now black is afraid of knight to g5, threatening f7, and he played h6. But that's just one more move that's not a developing move. Now this is starting to like reach critical mass here. And often when one side is this far behind in development compared to the other, well, then a combination can happen, and one does happen here, starting with bishop takes f7 check. Now, the king might as well take, because if it doesn't take, then he's just lost the pawn and has a crappy position anyway because he can't castle. So he goes ahead and takes, challenging white to prove it. Prove that the sacrifice is sound. So after king takes, then knight takes e5 check. Now after this check, we've got a few different alternatives. One, you can't take the knight because of this pin on the queen. So that means the king has to move. And we've got a few different places. We can't go to g6 because the knight covers that square. So that leaves f6, e6, and e7. Now, e7 is what actually got played. But let's take a look at what he could have tried otherwise. We know that king e7 lost, but we'll see that later. So first, let's look at king to e8. That's the simplest one that loses. Queen h5 check, and it's going to be mate. After g6, a useless move. Queen takes g6. King can't go to d7, so must go to e7, and then we have queen f7 checkmate. So again, after knight takes e5 check, we've looked at king to e8. Now let's take a look at king to e6. That runs into queen to d5 check. Now there's two alternatives. King can't go here. Knight covers it. If the king goes to e7, we've got queen to f7 checkmate, kind of like before. And so that leaves king to f6. And now we've got queen to f7 check. And that forces king takes e5. And so the king is leading his troops into battle, but it probably wasn't really very smart. So we've got bishop to f4 check, narrowing down the king's choices. King must go to d4, and that allows queen to d5 check. Mate. So let's come back to knight takes e5 check. And so we've looked at king to e8, king to e6. So now we've got, we have yet to look at king e7. That was played. So after king to f6, this one's a little bit trickier. That allows queen to d4, threatening a discovered attack, a discovered check. Again, remember, that knight can't be taken because that would leave the queen hanging. So, meanwhile, white is threatening knight to c6 discovered check, winning the queen. So there's not too much black can do here. Let's say he gets the queen out of the way so it doesn't fall to the discovered check. But then that allows knight to d5 check. Again, these squares are covered by this knight. This e7 is covered by d5, leaving only king to e6. And that allows knight to c7 check, forking the king and queen and winning the queen. So coming back to the position where white played knight takes e5 check, we looked at all the different moves, but what was played in the game was king e7. And now comes knight to d5 check. And these knights really cover a lot of ground. This knight that's checking also covers the f6 square, so the king can't go there. The king can't go to f7 or d7 because of this knight, and if it goes back to e8, we've got this familiar check followed quickly by mate. So after knight to d5 check, the only move is to play king to e6, the only way to stay in the game anyway. And now comes queen to g4 check. And actually there's only one legal move, and that's for black to take the knight. Oh, look at that king. I know you're supposed to put pieces in the center, but the king, I don't know about that. But anyway, white continues with his attack with bishop to f4 check. Now, the first thing we got to do is look at what happens if king takes e4. Then we've got knight to c3 check. That leaves king to d4 or d3. It doesn't matter which one. Either way, this comes. Queen to d1 check. And then after king to c4, we've got queen to b3 check. It doesn't matter whether he plays here or here. If he plays king to c5, it's queen to b5 mate. If he goes back to d4, then we've got queen to d5 mate. So, let's go back. Let's refresh ourselves and get back to the position so we can see these moves over again, because it's a little bit complicated here. Now in this position, where black played h6 because he was afraid of knight to g5, and then we had bishop takes f7 check, the king takes, and then we've got knight takes e5 check. Knight can't be taken because of the queen. Now we looked at the different alternatives. You can always rewind the video and check it out if you want. In the game, black played king to e7, then came knight to d5 check. Everything, all the other moves lose immediately except for king to e6, and then came queen to g4 check. The king must take the knight, and then bishop to f4 check. Now, before we looked at what happens if he takes the pawn. So in the game he actually played this, and the bishop drops back to e3 and checks. Now if the king goes to c4, queen to e2 mate. Now that's kind of cute. You'd think it looks like the king can get away, but everything's covered. The bishop covers all these squares, the knight covers b4, the queen covers this square, so that leaves only king to e5. And that allows queen to f4 check. The queen's protected, knight's covered, pawn's covered. Nothing to do but to go to e6, and then we've got queen to f5 checkmate. And it's good night Vienna, as my Uncle Bob was fond of saying.